So good morning. I have this strange thought this morning, which was, we haven't used old, simple praise songs for a while, and I couldn't think of any that I could, strum up on a guitar or anything. But I wondered if we could be thinking about them during this service. Just think of older songs that we used to do maybe years ago, or maybe did in different places. But songs, just simple little praise songs. And let's at the end of the talk, I want to see if anybody remembered any, and if so, if we could even collectively sing one. So that's what I'm just looking for that. Other than that, I got two beautiful videos to go along with the talk today, and one is Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, and it's in the Central Park concert. And another is Patty Griffin's tribute to Martin Luther King, because quite a lot of today's talk goes there. So I just thought, I want to look at some principles that I can glean from something that Dr. King wrote. So that's kind of where I see it going. Let's begin with a prayer. Lord, I so value the thing that you call us to, that you call us to become our best selves, to become our true selves. You call us to become like Christ. You call us to become outward in caring for others. You call us to not hold on to our own rights. And yet you call us to be people who work faithfully for truth and for justice. And sometimes it's hard to figure out how to balance all of these things. But I ask for real wisdom to be with us today, and for your presence in all that we do. And I pray that there be a renewing of our hearts and our minds and our being together as we're here, opening our hearts intentionally toward you today. Thank you. Amen. So, first song. I think this song works in so many ways. You can just think of it. You can think of the people that have been the bridge over troubled waters for you. You can think of how God has done that for you. You can think of how you've done it for others. You can probably don't think of yourself as God for others. Try to hold back on that.
That was lovely.
It's a nice song.
Yeah, good singer too.
Yeah.
A good singer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. Did you find, as I do, that it is easy for that song to have so many meanings? I can think of people that have helped me, or times when I've been called to help. I can think of God's presence in the middle of it. I could feel God singing some of the song, some of the words to me. It's a remarkable piece of music, and it speaks to, I'm on your side. I'm on your side. That's somebody coming alongside to help. So I thought maybe for prayers today, we just do quiet prayers, and I thought whatever it is that you're facing this week, let's focus on that. Let's just, we so often will start by trying to say a prayer for the world, or say prayers for people that we know are sick. I'd like to come back to that, but let's just start with just prayers for whatever you're facing right now. Let's ask for wisdom. Let's ask for God to give some inspiration, good strategies, comfort, strength, whatever it is that you need this week, or peace. Yeah. Let's start with that. We started just a little bit early this morning, like closer down time, and because I usually think that a perfect time for this church service to start is right between 25 to and 22, because just a couple of minutes. It'll allow a couple of minutes for people to be socially late. I think that's appropriate, and then. But anyway, we started a little on the early side for us, and so I asked everyone right at the start to be thinking about old praise songs that we might have sung here, or that you might have sung in other places. And I was thinking about this morning, wondering, because I think there's a beauty in simple, very simple sung songs which focus on God above all else. And so I just started to think, it's been a while since we've really had those and used them very much, because we've been exploring music and art in different ways. And I thought it'd be really nice to have some remembrance. Maybe if, at the end of the talk, if people could say, I thought of this one, or I thought of this one, and if there's one that a couple of us thought of, maybe we could even try and sing it. So that's the challenge for this morning. I'm repeating it because we started early. Okay, I guess I don't need this. So I'm going to do a little talk, and to me, the talk is really based on one question, and so I think you'll see it very quickly. It's about rights. It just occurs to me that so much of the teaching of Jesus seems to be to lay down our rights. And so here's what I started with, just a few of the Beatitudes. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The meek, the ones who try to bring peace, the ones who suffer. It seems to me that in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, Jesus, the heart of Jesus' teaching, that there's several important calls, not only in the Beatitudes, but also in other parts, to give up our rights, to think of ourselves as people without rights. And I think of Jesus as giving us the best path towards holiness in life of anyone. And so I'm wondering, if this is what Jesus would say to us, what does it mean, and how does it affect us when we're trying to make changes in the world? So here's those are my first thoughts. It's been a long time since I've said it. Do you remember my favorite joke about Beatitude verse 5? And some of you have probably heard, was that I actually saw this as a graffiti in a restaurant in St. Andrews. And the graffiti was, blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And underneath it said, if that's all right, okay. I laughed and laughed when I saw that. So this is the first thought. And here, later on in Matthew 5, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, don't resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you. Don't refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. And you think, well, Jesus is giving us a view of righteousness that goes way past the old laws that they've had. He's telling us about something that will even transform our heart. And the first thing that he wants to say is that we should give up our rights. So it's a very, if anybody asks anything from you, give it. It's a very interesting focus. How can this be right? Shouldn't we be, it seems to me that most of the teaching that would come from so many other sources would be, no, your own rights matter. Your true self. How can you bring your true self forward if you don't? So this is an important conundrum, I think. And St. Paul adds to the dilemma, because he's in Philippians 2, this most famous passage. He says, let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, didn't regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself and took the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, being found in human form. He humbled himself and became obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And the next part of that is St. Paul's going to say, and therefore Jesus raised him, or God raised him up above all others. But it seems to be in line with what Jesus is saying. There's the call for us, if we really want to be the people who follow Jesus, to hear this message, to lay down our rights. But recent social history shows such a deep need for change in society. We're at a kind of a crisis moment in society. We can see There's a desperate need for systems which are not fair to be overturned and changed. There's such a need for advocacy and for reform. And in fact, the more that you watch the news, the more frustrated you become, because it seems, I tend to watch the American news more than the Canadian news, but I know that the tendencies are the same. And it makes you want to overturn governmental systems that put roadblocks in the way of voting or in the way of societal change. It seems as though there are very, very powerful interests that control things and very often repress people or suppress people's rights as they do. And it just makes you want to long for something better. And I'm wondering, is it possible for these two impulses to work together? Can we be people of meekness, and can we be people of strength at the same time? Can we be people of meekness who will give up our own rights, and yet on the other hand will stand up for our own rights and for the rights of others? So of course I believe it's possible to do both, but to me it seems like it's a question that's worth thinking about. How do we put these things together? Is it possible to surrender your rights, empty yourself of position or privilege, and at the same time work hard for social change, for yourself and for others? It seems like a paradox, but I say yes. And this is the best I've got so far. Just that one is the righteous path that we attempt to walk upon. We choose what we believe truth looks like, and we do our best to make that come into being for ourselves and for others. And the other is the posture of our hearts as we do. We somehow try to keep the heart that Jesus is calling us to while we do the thing that we believe is the truth. We focus on the direction that we think is light and love and compassion and beauty and justice, and we go, this is where I see God's way go. That's what I believe God stands for. This is what I believe God would do. The Lithuanian Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas said, to know God means to know what has to be done. If you know God, if you know who God is in essential value, then you know what must be done next. You know what's right and what isn't right, and you know you'll work to make things right. But that doesn't mean that you need to do it with a heart that's ravaged by selfish impulse. It's very possible, I hope, to be able to have a heart which is the kind of thing which Jesus is calling us to at the same time as we walk and walk and walk toward a goal and never stop. So I wondered if there are examples in history. I started to think, I've been doing a lot of reading in medieval people's writings, and I couldn't think of anything right off. And then suddenly I thought, I want to look at the letter from the Birmingham Jail. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He writes a very long letter once when he's been imprisoned in Birmingham, Alabama. It's 1963. It's April 1963, and he's come to Birmingham, and he's taken part in some nonviolent resistance in the city as segregation is. As there's a great cry to dismantle segregation in the state of Alabama. And the local ministers have written to him to tell him how displeased they are that he did this. They're offended, they say, by his presence, by an outsider coming in. And they're offended because they think that he is demanding too much too soon. They think that, they too would like to see social change, but they think that it's better to do it gradually. And so Dr. King, I think everyone, it's a wonderful thing to Google. It's not that long, it's a letter. So if you just Google letter from a Birmingham jail, you can read the whole thing in 20 minutes or less. And it's worth it to read the whole thing. It's a masterpiece. But here I've got quite a few sections of it that I thought I'd bring. The first one is, my dear fellow clergymen, you deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham, but your statement, I'm sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. Isn't that a brilliant line? Like, you're angry that we're demonstrating, and causing some social friction, and the peace has been disturbed, the status quo has been ruffled. You're angry about that, but what about the conditions that have been in place that made this possible, or made it necessary? You deplore the demonstrations taking place, but you don't express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about the demonstrations. I'm sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and doesn't grapple with underlying causes. It's unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it's even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative. It's thoughtful. And then look at this, because it seems to me as though he's actually giving a 4-step strategy for how to answer my initial question. How could you do both? How can you give up your rights and fight for change at the same time? And he says, in any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps. Collection of the facts to determine whether injustices exist. Negotiation, self-purification, and direct action. Are you able to bring your heart to a place of indifference? Are you doing something with the wrong motive? You must analyze your own motives. You must be self-aware. So what we'll do is we'll try to determine whether injustices exist. We'll look for ways to negotiate. And we'll be very, very concerned about the state of our own soul. We'll try to make sure that we're looking at the log in our own eye before we look at the splinter in somebody else's. But having done that, then we will do direct action. I think it's kind of a brilliant strategy. We've gone through all these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham's probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the U.S. Its ugly record of brutality is widely known. Negroes have experienced grossly unjust treatment in the courts. There have been more unsolved bombings of Negro homes and churches in Birmingham than any other city in the nation. These are hard, brutal facts of the case. On the basis of these conditions, Negro leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the latter consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiation. And in the letter, he gives examples of stores that were willing to take down racist signs, but then they'll find their way back up. Further on, my friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. Lamentably, it's a historical fact that privileged groups seldom give up their privileges voluntarily. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up their unjust posture, but as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups tend to be more immoral than individuals. Individuals might get it and say it's true. A privileged individual might say, yeah, this hasn't been a fair situation. But not a privileged group in society. That doesn't happen very easily. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in the view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait has almost always meant never. We must come to see with one of our distinguished jurists that justice too long delayed is justice denied. And then further on in the letter, we will win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. Before closing, I feel impelled to mention one other point in your statement that has troubled me profoundly. You warmly commended the Birmingham police force for keeping order and preventing violence. I doubt you would have so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its dogs sinking their teeth into unarmed, nonviolent Negroes. I doubt you would so quickly commend the policemen if you were to observe their ugly and inhumane treatment of Negroes in the city jail. If you were to watch them push and curse old Negro women and young Negro girls. If you were to see them slap and kick old Negro men and young boys. If you were to observe them, as they did on 2 occasions, refuse to give us food because we wanted to sing our grace together. I can't join you in your praise of the Birmingham Police Department. It's true that the police exercised a degree of discipline in handling the demonstrators. In this sense, they have conducted themselves rather non-violently in public. But for what purpose? To preserve the evil system of segregation. Over the past few years, I've consistently preached that nonviolence demands that the means we use must be as pure as the ends we seek. That's good, isn't it? Doesn't that go along with my question? The means we use must be as pure as the ends we seek. I've tried to make clear that it's wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends. But now I must affirm it's just as wrong, perhaps even more so, to use moral means to preserve immoral ends. Perhaps Mr. Connor, who was in charge, was the mayor of the city at the time, Bill Connor, a very harsh man, and his policemen have been rather nonviolent in public, as was Chief Pritchett in Albany, Georgia. But they have used the moral means of nonviolence to maintain the immoral end of racial injustice. As T.S. Eliot has said, the last temptation is the greatest treason, to do the right deed for the wrong reason. And then he says, I wish that you had commended the Negro sit-inners and demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of great provocation. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the James Merediths, with the noble sense of purpose that enables them to face jeering and hostile mobs, and with the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, battered Negro women, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman in Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up with a sense of dignity and with her people decided not to ride segregated buses, and who responded with ungrammatical profundity to one who inquired about her weariness. My feet is tired, but my soul is at rest. I'm not riding the bus that you set aside and said I could go in that one, not this one. They will be the young high school and college students, the young ministers of the gospel, and a host of their elders, courageously and nonviolently sitting in at lunch counters, where, of course, whites and blacks are not allowed to eat together, but here they're doing it. Willingly going to jail for conscience sake. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for what is best in the American dream and for the most sacred values in our Judeo-Christian heritage, thereby bringing our nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the Founding Fathers in their formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. These are the real heroes. And these are the heroes that are actually standing for the values of the original founding documents and also for the things that we say we believe in. We had a privilege this week, Mary Ellen and I, and Nancy, and we were over at Mark and Karen's. We watched a film that was made by Jennifer Goh about Hong Kong. It's part of the Hot Docs Film Festival. I think it's still available while the Hot Docs Festival is going on, which is I think a 10-day period, so maybe a few days or a week left. And this is an 82-minute film with all kinds of camera work done in the midst of the days of resistance in Hong Kong, and it's called Faceless. And this is what one of the reviewers says about it. What drives some young people to risk their lives and fly in the face of absolute power? Using immersive camera work and a heart-pounding soundtrack, Faceless takes us to the front line of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong to meet 4 such young people. With total candor and wearing their protest face masks for anonymity, activists simply identified as the artist, the believer, the daughter, and the student share their stories. Despite their different walks of life, what unites these 4 is their willingness to fight against a controversial extradition bill in an effort to protect the one country, 2 systems promise made by China. As they take to the streets, they face tactical problems with creativity and counter police brutality with commitment and unity when the clashes between police and activists become increasingly violent and police fire live bullets into the crowd. Each has to re-examine their own intentions, philosophies, and personal relationships. If you get a chance to see this film, you should see it. Faceless. I felt so honored to know the person who made it, but I just was blown away by the courage of the stories of these 4 people. Yeah?
Are there places states where black people can't meet with white people?
I don't think there are places like that officially anymore. But when I was a boy, that was the truth.
Was it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know, we used to go down to Miami to see my grandmother, and when we would drive through, we'd get to North Carolina. The beginning of the South, there would be big billboards that would say, "Welcome to North Carolina, the heart of Klan country. Join your United Klans of America," including the Ku Klux Klan. They wouldn't say that on the sign, and then there would be drinking fountains for white people and black people. There would be restaurants that white people could go into and black people couldn't. There were bathrooms that white people could use, black people couldn't. Swimming pools. Black children weren't allowed into swimming pools if white children swam in them. And so I was just a young boy seeing that. It's a tremendous change that's taken place since that time. But there are still many, many repercussions of these kinds of things in society, and a lot more has to change.
Yeah, right.
What do you think? Is it possible to have a Jesus heart and also work toward demanding rights? I just love some thought about this. And in fact, just another way to say the same thing. Is it possible that having a Jesus heart would necessitate this? What do you think in relation to the things that I've shared today? Do you see the conundrum that I'm working on? You know, if Jesus tells us to lay down our rights, is it also possible for us to fight for social change? For ourselves and for others. I think Dr. Martin Luther King is a fabulous example of someone who did this beautifully, and it cost him his life.
And he probably knew that.
And he probably knew that, yeah, because there were bombs at his house. James Cone says that he knew for every day for 12 years that his life was at stake. He received so many warnings. Yeah, David.
The Old Testament example is Moses, who is said to be the meekest man on earth before God, but he spoke truth to power in the Egyptian empire, the Pharaoh, and led 1 million people into freedom.
This is a fantastic example. What book is that in? Just kidding. So, look at Moses. Moses is said in Numbers chapter 12 to be the meekest man on the face of the earth, and yet he speaks truth to power when he speaks to Pharaoh, and he leads 1 million people or 5,000, depending on what you think really happened. He leads a whole whack of people out of Egypt to freedom. That's amazing. What a great example. What else are you thinking about as you hear this talk and see these words?
The hard part is being a privileged person asking a less privileged person to be that meek one.
Yeah. So the hard part is, it says, is being somebody who's in that position where you're not being oppressed. You're actually you're happily a part of the society that's oppressing others, and you're telling somebody else to be meek. It's your job to be meek. It's your job to wait. It's your job to, that doesn't seem fair, does it? Any other thoughts? What if you were trying to figure out what was the best thing to do in a situation? How would you examine your own heart to try to determine that you were doing the right thing? That you were doing it with the Jesus posture of laying down your rights on the one hand, even if you're focusing on the truth of what it was that you believed needed to be accomplished. How would you do this?
Have a feel in your heart what right, what's wrong.
Say it again, Pete. I didn't
Have
quite.
a feel in your heart.
Oh, you'd have to have a feeling in your
You
heart
have a feel in your heart.
about what's right and what's wrong.
What's wrong? Yeah, you
think you're right. Sometimes can we be led astray by our feelings? Like could we have so much? Is it sometimes difficult for us to see it honestly? I think so, but I still think what you're saying is right. Inside the core of our being, we seem to know what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
I really like the distinction he makes in the letter about using moral means to uphold an immoral system. I think that's the danger. That seems to be the danger in places, like in my places of experience when it comes to social justice. That we follow what we're told is the right way to do.
So that this Dr. King's line that is very important, how important it is not to use moral means to uphold an immoral end. Yeah, and how dangerous it is to do that. I thought of a few other examples now in history that, I think at the time of the Reformation with Martin Luther, I think that he was so shocked by the peasants' movement that took some of his ideas and tried not to just change their religious ideas, but tried to change the oppressive government society and their system. And he hated that. And then he encouraged all of the oppressing forces, the emperor and the nobles, all of their oppressive forces to come with great force against the peasants. And 50 to 100,000 people were killed. And so I think that could be a similar example of a misuse of power. He thought that the end was the peaceful society, but he encouraged an immoral way to get there.
I think the power in this is that it's not for the individual. If it's one person standing up and saying, I want this for me, well, you're just a selfish, self-centered person. But as a king, it wasn't just for himself, it was for all blacks in America. So it doesn't seem terribly, it seems obvious to me, it doesn't seem terribly complicated that we actually have that moral obligation. Because we're not, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and love. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. I think there's so much more power in seeking the good of others than seeking the good of yourself. And it just seems, should be just an obvious outflowing of having a relationship with Christ, and that this is what you're supposed to be doing.
Well, I love this distinction. I think you've made a very important distinction. What you're saying is that for Dr. King, it's a different thing when somebody is fighting for others than when they're fighting for themselves. When an individual is fighting. But I think that needs to be done as well sometimes, especially in a situation where there has been some form of some weight pushing down. I mean,
the idea is that if and maybe idealistically, if that's what we're all doing, that should count. And if I'm fighting for Peter, hopefully Peter's fighting for me, and if we're all doing that, it is perhaps idealistic.
Yeah.
But it's kind of how I think it's supposed to work.
so that's a beautiful thought. It may be idealistic, but if we all are concerned about each other, then whenever anyone realizes that anyone is being put down by life circumstances, we should all be trying to band to help them. Yeah, I mean, and I guess we've all seen that work a little bit, and we've all seen it not work, So I do think this is a wonderful distinction, Phil, that you started with, is that, my initial question almost fades away when you think, yeah, it's not just about claiming your own individual rights, it's about fighting for the rights of others. Yeah. But I do think that the other one is a possibility too. Okay, well, just thought And is there anybody else that wants to say anything?
Just that, what Jeff said made me think of the scripture, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ.
Bear one another's burdens, Galatians chapter 6. Bear one another's burdens and thus fulfill the law of Christ. Beautiful. Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to look at a beautiful video that we've looked at sometimes in the past, and it's Patty Griffin who sings, great singer, and she wrote this song to honor Dr. King, and she uses some of the words from his last speech up on the mountain. I forget how much I love that song. So, what about Faceless? Did anybody remember anything? I was just thinking, I thought, if I thought of one this morning, and if I could figure out how to play it, I'd bring a guitar and do it. And I went, I can't. So, but I thought of a few went through my mind. What about you guys? Did anybody think of anything? Simple?
I love you, Lord, has lasted more than some of those.
Yeah. I thought of that one. That's a beautiful one. Anybody else remember one?
That's the one.
That's the one you thought of? I love you, Lord.
Blessed be the name.
That's the other one I thought of. That's funny. Anything else?
Breathe.
That's the other one I thought of. Come to think of it, yeah, I tried to figure out that one in my head in the shower.
The other day, some of us thought of something we never want to hear again.
Oh yeah, that's the opposite. I was thinking that's because I really have loved. I've been doing quite a bit of work in Meister Eckhart, who is a very interesting person. We don't know an awful lot about his life, but there's some beautiful sermons, and I've been reading them and thinking my way through them, and he's the one who is so determined to find the God beyond God. He thinks that all of our religious training has given us a picture of God, but that it's not good enough. So he wants to find the God beyond God. And so I was thinking about these little praise songs that we sing. Are they faithful to that? Are we singing a very small picture of God, or are we singing about the God who fills all of the world with his life and energy and creativity and preserves everything because he loves it? Are we thinking of the God who is beyond the small God of our religious understandings? And do the songs reflect that? Let's end with I love you, Lord. Let's see if we can do it. I love you, Lord, and I lift my voice to worship you. Oh, my soul, rejoice. Take joy, my King, in what you hear. May it be a sweet, sweet song in your ear. That's quite pretty. One more time? No, we're at peace. Okay. Have a great week.